Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art and Talk. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Art and Talk. Today, we're continuing with bringing you another artist as we're celebrating Christmas, which is right around the corner here in a few weeks. And we're taking a look at a few artists and how the life of Jesus and his teachings have played a role in the artist's life. All right, and through their art, of course. So today we have a guest who is a professional artist. He's a visual artist, and we'll be looking into his art, looking at a selection of some of his paintings and seeing how there's a correlation between Jesus and his art. And we'll also be diving into his journey, looking at some of the other visual art that he creates as well. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome our visual artist for today, Geoff Phillips. Hi, Geoff. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Oh, well, we're so glad to have you here. All right. So I was kind of thinking, if it's all right with you, Geoff, if we could maybe start with some of your current present painting series, which has to do with your faith and spiritual development, and then perhaps we'll sort of move chronologically back in time, if that works for you.
Yeah, sure, right on.
All right.
So currently I'm working on the book of Matthew. I'm painting it chapter for chapter, which is a kind of a large undertaking. It came as a result of me feeling kind of lost in my art and feeling like I wasn't walking the walk, like I wasn't representing my faith in my art. And I remember it was actually at Christmas time a couple years ago, and I just had to take some time off and some time to reflect and sort of ask God what I was doing. I had actually just gotten back from a trip. I was able to be a part of Canada's celebrating its 150th birthday. And they commissioned a large ship to sail around the whole country. And they had musicians in residence, artists in residence, elders, politicians, scientists, researchers. They had the whole gamut. It was really amazing. And we stopped in every community along the way. And really the focus of the journey was reconciliation, which is a big thing happening in Canada between the First Nations peoples, and it's an initiative by the government, to try and make things right and to talk openly about the past and past hurts and resolve them. And so I felt like I was really very much on the forefront of that. And that's where this painting comes out of. But when I got home, I was lost. I painted these paintings as a legacy for that initiative. And then I'd worked all my life on this sort of style and this way of creating art, and I was good at it. It was something that I was very proud of. It was sort of equally inspired by the First Nations as well as our European heritage in the arts. Like the group of seven are really big landscape painters up here who were alive they were painting in the 1930s, 1940s. And they really put landscape art and Canadian art on the map. So I developed this way of painting that was kind of these stylistic lines that were, equally inspired by the First Nations peoples, as well as Canada's landscape painters. And I couldn't paint that way anymore. I found like I was at a roadblock that Christmas a couple years ago. And I said, okay, God, what should I do? I just took some time to reflect, and I felt like each night I would sit, in my living room by the Christmas tree, and I'd look up art that I found inspiring, and I just kind of take note of what interested me and what really captured my attention. And what I felt drawn to was palette knife work, which was really odd. It was something that I had detested openly in the past and I had cut down and I never thought I would enjoy. But taking that time to reflect and take stock, I don't know if it was me or if God was leading me toward that, but I found myself taking time to pray, and I just gave up. I gave up all my art, my career, my art career, my practice over to God, and said, if this is the direction you want me to go, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it with you. And I want you. I really, what I really feel like was that he felt jealous. I was in these amazing remote communities on the West Coast that were First Nations communities, and they were openly, for the first time really in a long time, they're openly living their beliefs and their values and their faith. And I felt God was jealous. At the time, I thought maybe I was jealous, but maybe it was God in me that was jealous in reality. And he was saying, why aren't you open? Why aren't you living out your faith publicly? Why aren't you doing that? And so I was, really convicted when I came home, and I was really struggling and dealing with this and trying to figure it out what it all meant. And that's when I gave over my art practice and everything. And I really made a big change there. I started painting with a palette knife, and it was totally amazing. And when I first started painting with a palette knife, it was painting with the brush had grown tedious and hard, and it was like moving through molasses. Like I couldn't get anywhere, and I just felt like it was just wrong, and I couldn't do it anymore. And when I picked up the palette knife and began to paint, it was something totally different and new, and it was exploratory, it was exciting. I felt like a child, it was just full of excitement. And I painted many paintings all at once. And from there, I had a couple false starts. I didn't know what I should do to paint, for God and with God. So I had a couple false starts. I thought I might get into painting the Psalms at one point, and that didn't really go anywhere. And I think really it won't work if the inspiration's not there. And that, what I call the inspiration, is divine inspiration. I think it comes from God. So ultimately, I landed on the gospel. I found myself having inspiration to paint Matthew chapter 1, which is the genealogy linking Abraham, the father, to Jesus. So it's really just a list of names, and it's, people would call it maybe a really boring piece of scripture. But I got an amazing inspiration for that bit of scripture, and I painted all the people listed they're holding hands linked through time, and they're in a river that flowed across and wound its way across the canvas, and as a really large canvas. And it ended, of course, with the Holy Family, with Mary and Joseph and Jesus looking out over this expanse of people throughout time. And so I figured, after doing that, I realized that if I had inspiration to paint, that obviously came from God, because I don't know how I would have dreamed up such a great composition to really encapsulate the genealogy. If I could do that, then I should continue. I should do chapter 2 and 3 and keep going. So that's where this Book of Matthew series came from, and kind of how it got started. And I've been doing one painting a month. They're 4 feet by 5 feet. And I'm on chapter 10. It's been about 10 months. It's going to take, a couple of years to get through them, maybe more. And that's a very long-winded story, but that's it's been a long journey to get through, to explain how I came into painting the Book of Matthew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a beautiful unfolding. Thank you so much for sharing that, Geoff. Yeah, the whole way that everything was sort of laid out for you, step by step. And I have to say that, that takes a tremendous amount of faith and surrendering, where you saw that you were stuck, and you just kind of felt like you had been doing this for a while, and you had this style and you enjoyed it, but yet there was some spark, something was just missing. And then you surrendered all of your art and your practice to God. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful, opening for you, and so beautiful, to hear you speak about that. And then, as things unfolded, as you were saying with the palette knife painting, which was something very different, and now you're not holding the paintbrush and you have the palette knife, and it seems like you kind of took to that, even though, as you were saying, it was new. You felt like a child again. It was like painting that you were familiar with, but yet, you have a new tool, you have a new instrument, and it kind of like opened up a whole different vista and a whole different view of what your art could now evolve into.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was surreal. It was really amazing.
Mhm. You know what? Let's go ahead and take a look at one of your paintings inspired by the book of Matthew, and let's go ahead and share that. Give me just a moment, and let's pull that up. All right.
Yeah, so this is Matthew chapter 8. It's a chapter that really speaks to Jesus's power and the scope of his power. I think that's what Matthew is trying to lay out in this chapter. At the top, you can see Jesus. He's descending from the Sermon on the Mount. The previous 3 chapters were the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that through his teachings, people could see his glory. They could see that truly he was the Son of God. And so people all wanted to be around him. They surrounded him, and people started coming to him. And first on the left there, I've got him flanked by a leper who came to him and said, "If you're willing, could you heal me?" And he said, "Of course I am willing." And he healed him. And next he was approached by a Roman centurion. And so I've kind of juxtaposed the two, the leper on the left being sort of the lowest, poorest station that one could have in life. And then, of course, he's flanked on the right by a Roman centurion who of course, was in charge of hundreds of men. He has a horse, and he has this very fancy uniform and armor that he's wearing. And he asked if he would heal his servant who was at his home. And of course, Jesus healed the servant, but from a distance, from far away. So you see the road going away from the centurion down to his home, where there's a bright light in the home, and there's someone sick in bed there. And I don't know if the chapter was intentionally written this way, but I found these really interesting connections and pairings. So I've paired that house with Peter's house on the left. And Jesus next traveled to Peter's house and healed his mother-in-law. And many people came and were lined up outside the house, as you can see. And then the next pairing I found were these 2 people who came. The chapter title in the New International, the NIV, the New International Version, says "Count the cost." And as count the cost for following Jesus, there's 2 sort of 2 people who came who had higher stations. Like one was a scribe or a teacher, and then the other it doesn't say. But when Jesus tells them that foxes have dens to sleep in and birds have nests to live in, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's explaining to them that, hey, I'm poor, and by following me, you're not going to gain anything materially. And, you might not have a roof over your head. And so these people both were turned away. They turned away from following him because the cost was too great. The other one wanted to first go and bury his father, which was a noble excuse, but when you're approached, when you have the Son of Man in front of you, the time is now or never. Jesus was in his ministry, and if you wanted to follow him, of course, his time was short while he was here. And on the right side of the painting, I have them contrasted with the 2 demon-possessed men who Jesus took a ship across the Sea of Galilee. And when he disembarked, there were 2 demon-possessed men living in the tombs. And immediately they recognized him as the Son of Man. And yeah, of course, he drove the demons out. He sent them into a herd of pigs, who I have on the bottom right. They're immediately the herd of pigs ran off the cliff and into the water and were drowned. And at hearing about this, all the townspeople in the nearby town came out and they rejected him. So I have that on the bottom left of the painting here. And I really did find it interesting and important to include that, because in the beginning, everybody wanted to be around him and they wanted a part of his ministry. And in the end, maybe the cost is too great for most to follow him. They rejected him. But of course, the centerpiece of the painting is the boat in the middle when he crossed the Sea of Galilee with. It was his disciples who he called into the storm. A big storm came up and they were tossed from side to side. And these are seasoned fishermen and they couldn't get control of their ship. So Jesus, I don't know if he was feigning sleep, but he was asleep in the boat, as the story goes. And they eventually came to him and asked him for help. And he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it actually became calm. So that's also telling of the scope of his power again, where he can heal from close, from far, and he actually has control over the elements as well.
Yeah.
So I try to, these paintings have a lot in them. I try to pack in as much as I can from each chapter, and I try to take each chapter as a work of art, as every detail is important and it's there for a reason. And I try to find those juxtapositions that I can use to create a work of art.
Mm-hmm. And now, Geoff, is this you're using oil, and is this also large scale as well?
Yeah. So they're quite large. They're 4 feet by 5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it is oil with the palette knife. Yeah. So it's all kind of scratched in or laid on heavy, thick paint, onto the surface.
Mm-hmm. And since you started this series for 10 months, as you were saying now, have you gone back to using the paintbrush at all? Or are you just strictly now using the palette knife to execute these?
It's just pretty much strictly the palette knife. If I get a commission and people are looking at my older work and they want something specific, then I pick up the brush again. But I found it, very difficult to go back in my practice, in my work that I'm doing for the series here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the composition of it, your color palette, working in the palette knife, your eye moves around. The whole theme, it's so well designed, Geoff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another inspiration for the series, when I was around the time of painting the first one, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and just the vast scale of that series and that book, it really got me thinking of how to present the Bible in that way, and how to capture that, and the magnitude of the moves of God and the biblical scale of the gospel.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, Geoff, now that you've created 10 of these inspirational, beautiful paintings inspired by the book of Matthew and looking at the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ, I'm wondering what has been transforming for you? What has taken place for you on the inner level, the outer level, as a person, as an artist, over this whole 10-month, almost a year time frame with your new painting series?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I haven't been able to share with them too much. At my local church, of course, they're all hanging up there right now, up to chapter 9, and I'm working on chapter 10 currently right now. Yeah, I don't, with each one has been so different and has spoken to me in different ways. And just the many revelations that I'm after, just the taking the time to study. It's really funny just how I described the Matthew chapter 8 there. I can, because I'm so, well, I'm a visual learner, and I think in visual means. So capturing, putting pictures to all the scripture, I can kind of recount it verbatim now. Of course, not past chapter 10 yet, but after each chapter, memorizing scripture has never been something I've been very good at, but capturing it in paint and trying to compose a work of art out of it has lodged it in my brain really well. So that's been really awesome to have that, and to be able to study scripture, to take the time and to research and try to go deeper. It's brought about a greater understanding of the meaning that's held in the chapters that I'm looking at. My father passed away this past summer, and I was working on Matthew chapter, well, I can't remember now, but I took a month off anyways. Would have been chapter 6, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, it's different things, different connections to things going on were definitely speaking to me. Yes, chapter 6 is the middle one of the Sermon on the Mount. So in it, he's comparing, so of course he's teaching from the Sermon on the Mount, and he's comparing the Pharisees and their teaching in the city. So half the painting is a city, and you have these 3 examples of Pharisees. One is teaching on a soapbox in the middle, and he says, don't be like them, teaching on the street corner and saying, look at me, you know. And also don't be like them, don't fast, and don't distort your face so everybody can see that you're fasting and make a big deal out of it. Instead, you know, do these things in private. So the second half of the painting is, it's just a forest, and in the middle of the forest is a house, and in the house is a person praying, and there's, you know, light emanating from the house. He also talks about in the city how they store up treasures in their houses where rust and moth decay. So in all the houses of the city is these piles of gold. And the only other gold in the painting is, of course, emanating from this house in the middle of the wilderness where this person is praying. And so which is brighter, which has more value, you know? He says, instead, you know, seek me in private, in your private room, pray to me. And this was, it really spoke to me in that time, because my father, he saw God in nature. He's able to connect with God and see that he was real because he was in nature. And that's one of the things about that chapter was that it spoke about. It spoke about the birds in the air, and how if he looks after the sparrows, how much more will he care for you? And the lilies of the field. So I had the cabin in the woods, surrounded by these white flowers as well. And so, yeah, that was a really personal connection that really, yeah, I try to put emotional value into these little revelations that I get and inspirations that I draw out of the chapters. I try to imbue them with a passion, with something tangible. And usually, sometimes it'll just be one moment in a painting that really speaks to me the most. And I think for that last chapter, Matthew chapter 8, with the boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, that was the moment where I realized, hey, it was the disciples, the ones closest to him, the ones that really choose to strive and follow him. Those are the ones that they're called into a storm, you know. They're the ones that were called out into the storm with Jesus, So that was a sort of mini revelation there that really spoke to me, and that's what I wanted to be the centerpiece of that painting.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love these revelations that you're sharing with me, and what a beautiful connection in that chapter with nature and your dad, and being able to get in touch with that on a personal level. And wow, what a challenge, just from the get-go to embark on this encounter of painting each of the chapters of the book of Matthew, and that you've taken this on. I'm wondering, Geoff, are there any other preps that you begin with the paintings as you move into them? As we're saying, you've done 10 now. So in addition to, studying the chapters and whatnot, and getting familiar with it, and you're saying you want to be as descriptive and illustrative as possible, and present it with emotion, and tie in all the basic elements. Is there anything else, Geoff, that you do prep wise to begin once you're beginning each new chapter, and as you move through the painting, that you could share with us?
Yeah, I just start reading, and I start taking notes. I start reading different commentaries on this chapter, and I start reading different versions of the Bible for the different specific sentences and lines in the scripture. And I start praying about it. I start asking what I should be seeing, and I ask for the inspiration to follow through and have a successful painting. Um, and I think maybe I should say that I see art coming into the church more nowadays. It's kind of a resurgence, and I want to be very careful to present the visual. I think when the Reformation happened and art was taken out of the church, I think it was a rebellion against I think it became maybe a bit too nonchalant and in regard to art as a visual language to represent the Bible. I think it's a very important thing. I think visual language can be just as important, well, maybe not just as important as the written word. Of course, the word is more important than visual language, but I think we got to take visual language very seriously as a language. And that's another reason why I want to incorporate every bit of that chapter that I can visually into the painting, because I want to represent God's word, and I want to represent it correctly. And I want to take it seriously, and I don't want to misstep. So yeah, that's another sort of element to it,
And I think that's an excellent point that you made, because taking the visual aspect as an important and having merit to it, because as you said, like, you're a visual person, you're a visual learner, and so are many other people. So taking a painting and looking at this theme and subject matter can really help it come alive for many people. So I thought that was a really strong point that you made.
Yeah, thank you. And also people who who are new to the church or new to scripture, seeing visual representation for the first time, I don't want them to be led astray or get the wrong idea either. So that's another, if we're going to reintroduce arts into the church atmosphere or what have you, I just think we ought to be very, very careful with how we do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And yeah, it should be, I think it should be created by Christians. Because I know in the Reformation in the past, there's a lot of people, maybe it's commissioned from outside of the church, or that sort of thing.
All right, Geoff, is there anything else about your beautiful series that you have focusing on the book of Matthew and and sharing with us, the beautiful revelations and your take on all this. Because I do want to also present some of your other paintings, but I want to make sure that we've touched upon all the different aspects and areas of this series that you're currently on.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. Um, I am posting them on Facebook as I go. So if you want to follow along, by all means, friend me on Facebook or find me. And I try to share to a bunch of Christian art groups as I complete them.
Mhm. I'm wondering, before we move on to some of your other paintings and landscape paintings and whatnot, when you first started with the palette knife, I just kind of want to go back to that for visual artists that may be listening and those that maybe haven't dabbled with this yet. What was the hardest thing for you to take on, from, switching to a whole new feel in your hand, a whole new tool, a whole new instrument? Can you touch upon that for us, what that was like?
Yeah, well, for me at the time it was very exciting, but and I tried portraits very early with the palette knife, and I think I've got one that I shared with you of my daughter, and she's reading a book.
Mhm.
Yeah, that one it was one of the first paintings I did with the palette knife, and I couldn't get the features right because it was too rough. Like the palette knife is a metal blunt instrument, and the features of the delicate features of her face I could not do. She looked horrible with painted with the palette knife. So I actually painted the whole painting with the palette knife except for her arms and her face. I used a brush, and I used thick paint and an impasto technique.
Well, we're going to definitely be looking at that one. Can you touch upon also, you have also a prairie series looking at nature in some different ways. Can you touch upon that? And then we'll go ahead and pull up the one of your daughter and a few other ones.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So this, I did a series of 12 paintings. It was, started talking to the director of the art gallery Swift Current, which is our regional public gallery, and he wanted to do a show with me. So I put together a series of 12 paintings that were quite large, looking at plants found in southwestern Saskatchewan, which is where I am. And it was, I guess, the culmination of that style that I developed over my art career. That's, yeah, an amalgamation of First Nations influences and Canadian landscape painting. And so I really wanted to take that line work that I saw as being very Canadian and very unique and new, and I wanted to delve into what makes up the fabric of the land that we live in. I want to explore the different and learn about the different plants that grew in the area. And I quickly realized and found myself drawn to the parks. Parks in the area were really important for conserving the plants. Of course, you can't find anything growing in the farmers' fields or where they use chemicals maybe to take care of all the unwanted plants. So I found myself realizing the important roles that the parks play in conserving. And I did have quite an environmentalist bent at the time, and I really enjoyed it. It was great. Of course, the parks around here, Saskatchewan is known for being very flat and prairie, but we're by a very unique pocket right here in the southwestern corner of Saskatchewan called Cypress Hills, which is a big rise of land. It looks like the mountains when you're there. There aren't any mountains, but there's some hills and actual forest that sprouts up in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the prairies. So a lot of the paintings took place at Cypress Hills, also Grasslands National Park, which is in the area. And it's exactly that. It's just flat grasslands that's been preserved and conserved so that we don't lose touch of what grows here. And really the scope of the project, the idea of the project was to make the sort of tapestries, these giant canvases that just took in what grows underfoot. And so there'd be like close-ups of different plants. And I did develop a really unique way of working when I capture these paintings. Most often I'd be on my mountain bike and I'd have the raw canvas, if you can imagine the canvas just folded up and rolled up. I'd pack it in my pack. And when I found my subject matter, I'd unfurl this canvas onto the ground and weight it down with whatever I could find, with twigs, branches, or rocks. And I'd pack with me a brush and some brown acrylic paint. And I'd walk all over the canvas and I'd just draw everything onto it, right onto it. I'd step all over it and I'd get bits of grass and stuff in it. And it was great. I was able to capture a lot more of my surroundings into that canvas than I could with a camera. Of course, I would take a camera with me and I would photograph up close all the different plants and different elements that I wanted to have in the painting. But that was my way of working at the time.
Oh, what an interesting and fascinating process of how you began these plantscapes. Very interesting.
Yeah, so I'd bring the canvas back to my studio after and then stretch it onto a wooden frame and begin painting in oils. But because I had that drawing, I'd have the composition and it was inspired on the spot by what was in front of me. So it had a more life to it.
Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting because you're painting nature, painting the earth based on your environment where you reside in. And it's so interesting that you laid out the canvas literally on the earth, and that was the subject matter. And then like you're stepping on it and looking at what is underneath your feet, some of the things that you were tying into what you were speaking about. So what a really interesting way to kind of begin this whole plantscape of the prairie series. And then doing the photography and then bringing that back into your studio and then, kind of further developing it.
Yeah. So I take a bunch of different photos to make up one scene, for example. Like the little frame of a camera can't capture everything that you would want in a painting. Like it'd take maybe 20 photos to make up one painting.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead, Geoff, and let's take a look at some of these. And just a second. And here we go.
Oh, yeah. So this was actually a time when I was painting at Cypress Hills. I was artist in residence at Cypress Hills Park for 7 years. And this is a view from the lookout point up there. It's the highest point. And it's actually as high as the mountains, the nearest mountain range in the Rocky Mountains in Banff, Alberta. And so this is a very popular view. It was probably my most popular painting for a long time.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. Talk to us about the color palette is going in with what you were actually seeing. And can you talk to us a little bit about that and the composition and the light, how you're kind of combining all these elements in your beautiful painting?
Yeah, so you can drive up to this lookout point and you can see for miles and miles and miles. And you can actually see Maple Creek from there. I don't have it in the painting. I couldn't put it in. It was too small. But so you can see the kind of line work that I had developed. It's very bold, and I love to outline everything in sort of thick black. I'd make my own black with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It gives a much more vibrant, dark color. And if you're familiar with First Nations art, that's that kind of comes from there with their stylized animal figures. They use a heavy line work in that. And I just loved sort of developing my own version and applying it to the landscape. And you can see those, I think they're, oh, I hope I get this right. I think they're poplars, the white trees. I really loved how they looked like fingers and like lightning that went through the different canopy of the forest there. And so you got a lot of different elements. You got the background, the midground, and the foreground. And I just love the juxtaposition. I really played off of that bright white that you saw in those branches and the poplars that were reaching up. And I definitely love the bright orange that I got on that spruce right in the middle.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But it's heavy, thick oil paint applied right out of the tube. That's how I generally work. The turpentine and the oil mixes that you can add to the paint to make it more luminescent, it's just not for me. I'd find myself painting and it would just go, it would dry up or go, I'd forget it was there and I'd be painting for hours. So I said to heck with it, and I just embraced how I was painting with just the thick oil paint straight out of the tube.
Oh, I love all that you're sharing. Let's go ahead, Geoff, and let's move. Okay, there we go. There's the Book of Matthew one that we looked at. Beautiful. And okay, so here we go. Another plantscape.
Yeah. So this one was, I felt, was my most successful of the series, of the Plantscape series. To me, it expressed everything I wanted to express with that series. I kind of fell into the trap of depicting the sky and the landscape too much, getting too landscapey with these paintings from time to time, when really my focus, I wanted to focus in on the land, just like this one did, which was just the grasses and the things growing. And you can see the spikes of the cactus and up along maybe near the top of the painting. They look kind of like starbursts. They're bursting out from the center all around. And so there's those cactus. And what I really loved in this one was those little white flowers too on the top portion of the painting, that they look like kind of starlight as they were speckled through the grasses. And then lots of different types of plants that I don't really know what they were growing in the middle and the foreground there. But I really like how this one came together and how it creates that other sense of another world where you can just get lost in I really took the time I felt with this one to flesh out all the interconnected lines and details in there. And I feel like a person could get lost into it.
Right. Yes, you definitely get that feeling, Geoff, really kind of zoning in on, the earth and a whole different world and this whole, interrelationship, all of what's going on. And you really bring us into really wanting to examine this world and be a part of this world and look at it a lot closer too, and also appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Okay, now this is the one you were referring to before with your daughter, when we were discussing the palette knife and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. So this was exciting. I experimented. It was one of my first breakthrough paintings, with a fresh outlook, fresh style. And yeah, I really like some of the things I did in here, like the shadow on the wall is made up of a bunch of scratch marks, to achieve sometimes when you take a photo, I remember this was from a photo, when you take a photo, the shadows become just a fuzzy, blurry, background. And I think I achieved that sort of fuzziness with more exciting scratch marks, these lines that were full of, kind of rich colors. I can see kind of some of the reds in there and greens and blues. And then the pillow directly behind the book that she's holding, I left some of the white shine through, some of the white of the canvas, so it doesn't actually have any paint on it. And that was And it really helped me to see doing this painting that I could achieve the amount of detail and realism I could achieve with the palette knife. And I was really happy with it. Again, I struggled too, with the form and the skin and the face, because it's so delicate, the features. And when I was painting with that sharp palette knife, it just mangled it. So I had to I had to paint with the brush the features of the face and the arms too. I painted with thick oil paint with a brush, and I think it paired really nicely, because you get the really harsh lines from the palette knife, maybe creating this kind of nightmarish or scary shadow around the figure, who's painted in a really delicate, nice way with the brush.
Mhm.
And of course, there is that element of being a reader and reading a book called The Storm. So you can almost see the allusion to the storm with the dark and scary lines that the palette knife makes all around.
Mhm.
And it was in a little book nook that we made for the kids, on the floor, it was filled with stuffed animals and blankets and pillows, a safe place and a quiet place to read.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share. I love everything that you've been sharing, and you've given us such a well-rounded insight into your thought process, your creative process, subjects, themes that are important to you. Thank you so much, Geoff.
Oh, thank you.
We have a few more minutes. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon with your art and your journey before we wrap things up that you'd like to share with us?
I don't know. I was just thinking I could bring you and the iPad into the studio and show you Matthew chapter 10 as it is right now.
Very good.
It'll be very quick, I promise. Hello. So here we are.
Some light.
Oh, I gotta point it this way. So this is Matthew chapter 10. And of course, it's the first time that Jesus mentions the cross, and it's where he sends his disciples out to the towns of Israel to share his message. And so here I have Jesus drawing the cross on the ground, and the 12 disciples around him. And of course, they don't know that he's going to be crucified in the end. So that's Matthew chapter 10.
Thank you for taking us into your studio and showing us that work in progress. That was a nice treat for us, Geoff. Thank you.
Right on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So in that particular piece that you just showed us, which again, I love that you gave us a little look into that. What are the final touches going to be? What is your final steps with that?
I've got to flesh out some of the details, and up above there on the top part of the painting, it's all kind of framed by a web of roadways or highways that the disciples will be traveling to the different towns, and they form the shape of the Star of David, because they were requested to go to the cities and towns of Israel. And so it's really interesting. In the middle, he's drawing the cross on the ground, but it's framed by within the Star of David, which of course represents Israel now. And at all the different points of the star are the different towns and the different teachings and lessons therein that he kind of outlines within the chapter. So it's again going to be another complex piece, and I love these complex pieces where it really it's like a puzzle to me, and it's exciting and challenging for me to put together.
Yeah, and that was great just seeing that work in progress and now hearing your elaboration on it. And I just want to say I love your openness, Geoff. Just going back to, just being open and even surrendering your painting practice, something that you love, and just saying, what do I even do with this? And just, honoring that whole process, and just, taking time to reflect, and as you were saying, asking God, well, what do you want me to do with this? And just allowing yourself to be led, and to be guided, and of course, taking us through this journey, as you've been sharing with us. We do have to close the show out, Geoff. So we always like to let our guests provide the closing comments. If there's anything you'd like to close the show out with, and let us know how we can stay in touch with you, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you again. And I just have to say, I suppose that, yeah, my art was my biggest source of pride and ego. And so it was a hard thing to invite God into and to give over to him. And of course, I'm really excited with where it's going, and you can follow along on Facebook is probably the one that I use the most. Instagram doesn't seem to have the right aspect ratio to share these paintings. So yeah, follow me on Facebook or the links and get in touch. My website actually as well is geoffphillips.com. And thanks again for having me.
Yeah, it was wonderful to have you on, Geoff, and thank you again for sharing your current painting series on the book of Matthew and giving us some insight with what that's all about, looking at some of the artwork, and just taking on that big challenge and what it means to you on a personal level as well, and then taking a look at your plantscapes and prairie, really honoring the land around you. Thank you so much, Geoff, and wishing you much success with your current series and all your art endeavors. And a very Merry Christmas to you and also to your family.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Geoff. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching Art and Talk today. We appreciate your support. Please stay in touch with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Facebook as well. Please like and share. And we'll be in touch soon. We'll talk soon on the next Art and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed.